I'm almost there. You know me, I'll be fine. Sounds good. I'll be back as soon as I find Chris. I will, but I gotta go. Why does everyone think I'm gonna get in trouble? What the...
Usually, the games that cover on my Thinking About series have very specific characteristics. They're either games trapped in past-gen limbo and haven't been ported to modern platforms, or they fly well under the radar from any attention by the mainstream. Basically, they're not titles that are trending these days. I'm gonna do something different with this video, but talking about a big game that just came out a month ago and is still on everyone's mind as of this video. I'm talking about the Resident Evil 2 remake. I love this game. I'm not really into horror, but I took to this game for a solid month and ran it over and over again. I remember playing the original RE2 years back, but I'm not sure if I played it on normal or only on easy and breezed past the game with the infinite SMG. But one of my favorite games is Resident Evil 4, and I played that almost as thoroughly as I played the new RE2. For clarity's sake, I'm going to just refer to each version of RE2 as either the remake or the original. What I like about the remake is how it's not completely faithful to the original. It changes up the level design to ease the player into this new style of survival horror, and it rewrites characters who barely made an impact in the original, but now have a chance to share the spotlight with the main cast in their own tragic vignettes. The most interesting thing to me about the remake's design is how it feels like an amalgamation of every version of Resident Evil thus far. It's got the story and setting of one of the classic games, the movement and combat that's similar to the action-oriented titles that started with 4, and the minimalist UI aesthetics of 7. It's cherry-picking parts of what makes each of those styles of games unique and creating a whole new experience. Not only that, but it also feels like some design decisions are a response to past games. I said before how the remake changes the level design to ease players into this new style of gameplay, but it also changes the layout to throw off players familiar with the original. The route from the wreckage to the police station is severely truncated, yet instead of cutting out those areas, they're actually placed in a different section of the game. The east hallway in the RPD's first floor was always considered the most dangerous area in the early game, but that's the first area you're able to access in the remake instead of the west office. This would surely catch veteran players off guard who are expecting a one-to-one recreation. The remake retains some of the key items in the original, but some of the purposes have been changed around. The 2 Virgin Hearts are now only a single gem, and it's used on a jewelry box instead of on reliefs affixed to the wall of a certain room. The suit keys are still present, but now Leon and Claire split ownership of the club and heart keys, which lead to branching paths in their respective stories. You still need to find a crank and valve wheel and create an explosive, but they're all used on different areas in the remix versions of the RPD, and these differences stretch as far back as the Umbrella Labs, or the Nest as Remake calls it. These changes drastically reduce the backtracking you have to do in the RPD portion of the game, and what could feel like 2 hours of exploration on your first run could be cut down to almost half an hour on repeat playthroughs, once you learn where all the items are and the combinations to all the locks and puzzles. It's good that they streamlined the key hunting in the remake because it does just enough to remind you of the things you had to do in the original, but it never feels like it's padded out. The other reason why it's good that the remake simplifies the key hunting and puzzle solving is that there's more of an emphasis to combat in the remake compared to the original. Classic Resident Evil gameplay was more about resource management by minimizing combat encounters since you need to save that ammo on stronger enemies instead of wasting them on trash mobs. When combat does happen, the tension is more about how many shots it'll take to stop an enemy and keep them down. Accuracy isn't that much of an issue, especially if you're using auto-target in your settings. This is where the Resident Evil 4 comparisons begin. The remake's controls are very reminiscent of RE4, with some improvements to mobility and camera controls, at the expense of certain context-sensitive actions. The T-Virus zombies are no ganados. They tank bullets, and it takes a lot of effort to even stagger them. And since Leon is still a novice at zombie bashing, he can't pull off the same sick maneuvers he's mastered in 4. Without the crowd-controlling moves and steady ammo drops fallen enemies provided from 4, the zombie hordes are scary again. You need to be smart with your ammo. You could spend most of your rounds on headshots and hope for the rare critical hit that'll keep a zombie down, or you could target their extremities and knock them off balance. They still pose a threat, but you'll have an easier chance to either avoid their grabs or finish them off. A staple of RE4's moveset was the knife. The meta for forced combat was to stagger a ganado with a shot either to the leg or the face with a follow-up melee attack. Then you knifed them while they were getting off the ground to minimize the bullets you need to use. The remake's knives aren't as sturdy, and giving the knife durability discouraged that kind of strategy. It's still totally viable, but now you need to consider if it's worth wasting a knife on some downed zombie when you might need it later down the line if another one grabs you. If a zombie has you in its clutches, you only have a few seconds to use a sub-weapon to break out of its grasp. It doesn't have to be a knife, it can also be a grenade. But the knife is reusable after you kill the zombie you stabbed, as long as it still has some durability. By the way, the counter system for sub-weapons is an evolution to the daggers you could use on zombies in the remake for the first Resident Evil game. It's cool to see Capcom take all of these disparate elements from the series and consolidate them so that one item can perform several functions. I don't have much playtime with Resident Evil 7, but the one thing I noticed from the demo was how much restraint was placed on the UI. It's not completely utilitarian like the classic games, and it's not high-tech like the action titles, but a slick refinement of both methods. In the remake, the only information you see on screen is the bare essentials: your objectives, your ammo count or the condition of your knife, and any active status effects like poison or health buffs. When you take damage, your health condition flashes on screen temporarily, if you change states from fine to caution to danger. The inventory is limited, and each item takes up either 1 or 2 slots, much like in the classic titles, but there are chances to increase your carrying capacity. Health works much like the classic games, where there's no readout while you're moving around, but you can check your status when you go into your inventory. One thing I like about the menu is that instead of taking you to a separate screen, it overlays on top of the in-game footage, so you're always reminded of your current state as you fumble through your equipment. I always prefer overlay menus over separate screens. Some puzzle solving requires you to find an item and inspect it. When you use key items, they have quick animations and operate on their own, and I like these little flourishes. They indicate that you've changed the state of the world, but they don't lock your character into an animation, so it doesn't feel intrusive to the gameplay, which matters in more hectic moments like getting pursued by an enemy. Something cool about mirroring the shooter mechanics of the action titles and the monster designs from the original is that the monsters have prominent features that work as natural weak spots to shoot for, but aren't too obvious to take you out of the immersion. Some monsters got redesigned to have weak spots that blended with their designs and felt like a callback to other Resident Evil enemies. The Ivies now look like human zombies that were taken over by plant life, and the bulbs they sprout, along with their bullet sponge quality, makes them resemble the regenerators from RE4. The art direction is impressive in the remake. I really like how all the characters have a very distinct color palette, and some stand in stark contrast to the blues and greens that permeate the environment, but they're never butting heads with the mood of the game. Leon, Claire, Ada, and Sherry are the most obvious examples since they get the most screen time in the game. Capcom found a balance between keeping the characters looking grounded and believable, but still iconic to their original designs. The boss arenas are a perfect union of recreating the iconic spaces in the original and functioning like the claustrophobic but maneuverable stages of RE4. It's possible to juke around the boss in their given arena, but you're never going to get too far away from them that they won't be able to reach you. Birkin's first fight reminded me of Vitoris Mendez, the Big Cheese as he's better known, in RE4, where you have to be constantly moving in this maze of walkways. Bigger stages like Birkin's third and fourth forms were more open, like the El Gigante fight, and the giant alligator makes a return as a chase set piece for Leon, which reminded me of Del Lago. There are some issues with the remake. Besides running around, there's no real evasive actions you can take when enemies attack. Some boss moves are designed to trip you up and get you when you think you're out of range, and the counterattack where you use a sub-weapon only works during grapples. I get why they removed the QTEs because they take away from the tension in combat, but it'd be nice to get something similar to the quick dive in Metal Gear Solid 5. There are instances where you can break out of a zombie's grasp without items, but I never knew how to pull it off consistently. And while I said before that it's good the game pared away the backtracking from the original, I'm not a fan of how Claire gets the vaccine for Sherry in the remake. In the original, there was a whole process you had to do to get the vaccine prepared, and you needed to make sure you weren't taking any damage while transferring the vaccine to its more stable state. This process is replaced with synthesizing a chemical to destroy Plant 43, the giant plant that's taken over one of the wings in the nest. Claire just gets the vaccine in a similar fashion to how Leon gets the G-Virus sample, and Sherry gets cured off screen. It's not as satisfying to me compared to the original. Oh yeah, and the IVs now have a one-hit kill move if they grab you and you don't have a sub-weapon to break out. So, this is where all the knives you've hopefully stockpiled come into play. And there's an in-game challenge where you have to disable one by shooting at its bulbs, but I haven't been able to get it without turning on aim assist just for that challenge. Still, it's impressive how Capcom reworked Resident Evil 2 from the ground up and took parts from every version of the series and made something new out of those familiar elements. This style of survival horror has potential for other remakes, most obviously Nemesis, where it could bring back some of the evasive maneuvers from 4 since there's supposed to be a dodge mechanic in RE3, but for other Capcom titles as well, like Dino Crisis. I've got a companion video following this about the Ghost Survivors DLC, but if you're watching this video and aren't into horror games in general, please consider playing Resident Evil 2. I'm not that into horror titles myself, but I like the ones with combat in them because they can at least put up a fight instead of running and hiding, for the most part, and RE2 is one of the best games to come out early in the year.
Leon?
Hey. We made it.
Just like I said we would.